There are buildings with histories, and sometimes those buildings also carry stories. In August of 1878, George Begley opened a wagon manufacturing business in Poplar, Bluff, Missouri. 5 years later, the Begley Block was built, a full block of buildings that would become part of the growing town. Inside one of those buildings, George opened a furniture and hardware store. And somewhere along the way, the history of that building became tangled with something a little darker. There are stories of a hanging, a haunting, and strange occurrences that supposedly continued long after the people who witnessed them were gone. But what actually happened inside the Begley Building? Tonight, we're going to dig through the history, follow the legends, and separate the documented facts from the folklore. Stay tuned as we investigate the story of the Begley Building and the woman who is said to haunt it. Welcome back to the Agatha May Detective Agency. I'm Agatha May, and I'm so glad you're here. As I research old cases, I sometimes come across a side story, a piece that doesn't fit into the main story but is interesting on its own. In my recent research for our next episode of Laced, I came across the following story on a Facebook page about Poplar Bluff. The original article was written by Steve Hankins in 2014 and is posted on cmo.net. And I'll leave the link in the description. I'm not going to read the entire story, but will paraphrase what it's about. I'm also not going to say that Steve got all of the facts wrong, because the way the article reads, he was just repeating what others had told him. So they're the ones who got some of the facts wrong. However, he did spell a name wrong. There's no I in Begley, Steve. So the story is that the Begley Building that stands at 401 Vine Street is haunted. According to the article, it's haunted by more than one little ghosty, too. At the time of the article, the Begley Building was home to Hayes Music Store, and employees told stories of hearing hail and wind howling when there was no storm outside. Ghostly footsteps could also be heard, slowly echoing in empty rooms. There were claims that employees saw tuning pegs on guitars wind and then unwind themselves. A chandelier was seen swinging back and forth so violently that it hit the ceiling. So who are the ghosts that roam the building? Well, there was a claim that the Begley Building was used as a refuge for those who were injured or in need after a devastating tornado in Poplar Bluff in 1927 that took 102 lives. Well, there definitely was a tornado. It occurred on the afternoon of May 9, 1927, and the clocks in the town stopped at 3:13. From an article I found, there were at least 103 people who died. But I didn't find any evidence of the Begley Building being used as a refuge after the tornado. I did find that it was used as a temporary space for the circuit courtroom and offices for county officials, but there was no mention of it being used as any kind of space for those displaced by the storm. And then we get to the ghost that popped up, not literally, during my research of our next poisoner. According to the article about the Begley Building, the woman who haunts it was named Nora Edwards, and she was a woman of the night who had been tried for her offenses inside the Begley Building back when it was used as the county courthouse and jail. She was said to have been a heroin addict and was going through withdrawals during a stint in the jail and became so distraught she hanged herself using her own scarf. So I decided to dig and see if I could find Nora's story, and boy howdy and by golly did I find some stories. Nora was a little rapscallion. But her name wasn't Nora Edwards, it was Nora Easton, and she first made it to the newspaper in Poplar Bluff, Missouri in 1904. Poplar Bluff is way down south of Missouri, and part of it sits on the banks of the Black River. And in 1904, the population was around 5,000, and this was the town's heyday as a logging and timber town. But Nora didn't have anything to do with the logging or timber trade. She made her living in a, more flamboyant way. Before I share Nora's escapades, let me warn you that the newspapers at the time felt it a need to explain to the reader whenever the person they were talking about was black, Because in the early 1900s, the white folks didn't even try to hide their racism. The powers that be needed everyone to know when a black person was arrested because that was a way to keep racism and stereotypes perpetuated. Of course, they didn't afford the same courtesy very often to any white people who were arrested, which is kind of funny because you still knew they were white because the newspapers didn't tell you the color of their skin. Anyway, as I tell the stories of Nora, the newspaper clippings that I share will include those racial descriptors. I have purposely left out the more egregious ones. According to Find a Grave, Nora was born in 1890. But if that's true, then she was first arrested when she was only 13, and I just don't think that's correct. She had a brother who was born in 1886, but a stepbrother who was born in 1891. And on the 1900 census, when Nora would have allegedly only been 10, she wasn't listed as living with her family. So we'll just say we don't know for sure when Nora was born. So in December of 1904, Nora was arrested for assaulting another woman. The women involved were described as, quote, denizens of the island. I haven't been able to find out what exactly the island referred to, but I'm going to bet it was racist. Her next appearance in the local newspaper was on April 14, 1905, when she was arrested for running a house of ill shape. Now, that could have been a brothel or just a house that was used for illegal ventures. From subsequent arrest, I would guess the latter. But whatever it was, the police were back knocking on the door, or more likely knocking down the door, on April 19, 1905, when one Nick Hill shot Eddie Squirrel Jones in the arm. Well, Squirrel wasn't having any more of that, and he scampered straight down to the police department and told them what happened. And the cause of all the ruckus was Nora. The two men both had the hots for her, and this wasn't the first time they'd come to blows. However, it was the first time a gun was brought into the fray. According to the April 20th, 1905 edition of the Weekly Citizen Democrat, quote, Jones's injuries are not fatal, and he will, unfortunately, soon recover from his shooting scrape, end quote. Well, at least they weren't shy about writing exactly what they were thinking. I found a marriage license from 1906 for an Eddie Jones and a Nora Easton, and both lived in Poplar, Bluff at the time. I find it a bit too much of a coincidence for the marriage to not have been between Nora and Squirrel, but I'm not sure that marriage lasted more than a sneeze or two. On September 20th, 1905, gun-toting Nick Hill was back in Nora's life, but this time he was on the receiving end of a knife that she was brandishing. Nick ended up with a broken arm and a stab wound on his side. Nora was arrested, but ended up having the charges dismissed. It would be 7 months before Nora made the newspapers again. On April 23, 1908, the sheriff went to her house on Water Street to serve a warrant for her arrest on charges of robbery and pickpocketing. When he got to Nora's, she was in bed, so he read the warrant to her while she was still snug as a bug under the covers. He then waited for her to get dressed, which was a bit naive on his part because Nora was on her game that night. She slipped on some shoes and skedaddled right out of the window. She made it to a neighbor's house where she procured a long coat and a hat, and then led the sheriff on a merry chase through the neighborhood. More than 50 houses were searched, but Nora wasn't to be found. It was later discovered that she had skedaddled right out that window and straight to Texas. She wouldn't be back on the radar in Poplar Bluff until November 28, 1914, when there was another shooting at her house. Once again, it was two men fighting over the affections of Nora, and in January of 1915, one of those men caused even more trouble for Nora when he set her house on fire. I'm beginning to think that Nora needed to choose better men. She also needed to make better decisions because on February 3, 1916, the police were back at her house. This time it was on charges of robbing Charlton's store, and she and a handful of her accomplices were arrested. Nora tried pleading her innocence, but when police searched her house and found trunks full of the stolen merchandise, her plea seemed just a little less than honest. While she was out on bail for the robbery charges, she was arrested again on February 21st. It seems she bashed a woman over the head with a poker and was commencing to lay out another woman when police broke up the fight. And you know what the fight was about? Men. These men were not worth it. On April 3, 1916, the circuit court opened for the April term, and while Nora's accomplices received various sentences for the robbery of Charlton's store, Nora's charges were dropped. On July 13, 1916, Nora was back in the hot seat when she was arrested for bootlegging. She was found guilty and fined $50. And then the newspapers didn't write about Nora for another 5 years. But when they did write about her, it was for another arrest. This time, she was arrested for being an accomplice to a holdup. But again, the charges were dismissed. In April of the next year, Nora was arrested for fighting another woman in front of the Gray wholesale house. There isn't a record of the consequences, but man oh man was Nora ever the scrapper. She stayed out of trouble for another 4 years, or at least didn't get caught, but on December 19, 1926, Nora was arrested for robbing a man of $35. That case was eventually, you guessed it, dismissed. She sure had a way of getting her cases dismissed. And it makes me wonder if Nora was using that something that made men fight over her on the sheriff or the prosecuting attorney. On April 27, 1927, Nora was drunk and got arrested again for fighting with a woman. During the fight, 2 buckets were heaved through the plate glass window of the Odom's Cafe on Broadway Street. Nora pleaded guilty and was fined $25. May 19, 1928, Nora was arrested for bootlegging. Police raided her house and found 1.5 gallons of moonshine, which really doesn't seem like an awful lot, does it? That was probably just for Nora to drink, and she'd probably have it gone in a day or 2. She was arrested for bootlegging again on September 9, 1928. Police raided the houseboat that Nora was living on a tip that they would find narcotics on it. But when they got close, someone inside opened a trap door in the bottom of the boat that allowed the contraband to sink to the bottom of the river. However, the police did find a small amount of beer and arrested Nora for that. I would venture a guess that they were just a bit peeved that someone had given the contraband a bath in the river and wanted to arrest Nora for something, even if it was just a small amount of beer. And staying true to form, Nora was arrested again on January 5, 1929, on possession of a small quantity of moonshine. She and her paramour at the time were also arrested on charges of adultery. But true love was as fleeting as ever for Nora, and on February 15, 1929, she was arrested for taking pot shots at that same adulterous partner with a .45 automatic. And when police raided her houseboat, guess what they found? Moonshine. On March 1, 1929, Nora's luck ran out. That was the day the feds caught up with her. She was still in jail from her previous arrest, and her houseboat had been locked up. So there was no chance for anyone to get rid of the goods through the trap door. And the goods the feds found was a large quantity of morphine. Nora was in it. On the morning of March 5, 1929, Nora Easton hanged herself with her own scarf in the Butler County Jail. It was later learned that she had been suffering from severe withdrawals and had stated that if they didn't give her a shot of morphine, she was going to hang herself. Her funeral was 2 days later, and she was laid to rest in the Poplar Bluff City Cemetery. It's a shame to me that in the article about Nora's death, her life was summed up by her race, her addiction, and her familiarity with the local police. I think Nora was more than that, so I want to read what her parents published in the newspaper. Quote, "Card of thanks. We take this method to express our thanks to our many friends for their deeds of kindness and words of sympathy in the death of our dear daughter and sister, Nora Easton. We thank each one for the beautiful flowers. We can't find words to express our thanks to the Reverend Mays for his consoling words and Mr. Grow Greer for the expert services and efficiency shown as a funeral director. Mr. and Mrs. George Chilton, parents. William Easton, brother. Charles Jackson, brother. Mrs. Inez Everett, niece." End quote. But the question that started all of this remains. Does Nora haunt the Begley Building? The short answer is no. The Begley Building was temporarily used as the circuit courtroom and offices, but I found no record that it was ever used as the jail. In 1928, the jail was housed in the basement of the new City Hall building, and that same year the new courthouse was built. And according to the 1929 City Directory, the jail was on the 4th floor of the courthouse. So whoever was swinging on the chandelier in the Begley Building, it wasn't Nora, even though I'm sure that's something she would have thoroughly enjoyed. But you know what else I found about the Begley Building? Way back in 1894, it wasn't just a store where you could buy furniture and hardware and such. Old George Begley had decided to be the town's funeral director and undertaker. And you know where his practice was? In the same building that would later become that haunted music store. In 2024, developers were working on the Begley Building, but I haven't learned that it's actually been opened as anything as of yet. I wonder if those working on it have had any encounters with one of the long since dead that aren't happy about their eternal home being disturbed. If Nora was going to haunt anywhere, it seems as though it would be the courthouse, or maybe on a dark night if you walk along the banks of the Black River south of town. You can hear the creaking of boards of an old shanty houseboat that has long been gone, and maybe hear the thump of a trapdoor being opened, a splash from something hitting the water, and then the sound of a woman's laughter. Thank you so much for joining me for the first episode in the Fact or Folklore series. If you have an urban legend, a ghost tale, or other bit of folklore that you want investigated, let me know and I'll see what I can find. I'll be back soon with more true crime news, more cases from the past, and whatever else tickles my fancy. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and don't let the ghosties get you.